September, and this week we are talking about democracy and information. And it seems pretty fitting since the election is coming up, and we've had a lot of weird things, the death of a Supreme Court justice, the CDC introducing and then getting rid of information, and also, of course, the situation we have with our news and everyday lives, which means that information is not necessarily reliable. And we have a difficult time, all of us, including myself, sifting through what information we receive. We live in information overload, and we also live in a time where there's a lot of emphasis on opinion, on influencers, and very little emphasis on experts or thinkers or even popular discussion that kind of rests on some place of rational means of debate. Rather, we live in a space of emotion. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what is democracy. We're going to look at the assumptions that democracy tends to rest upon and why those assumptions are often a problem. And we're also going to talk a little bit about where we're at today, but we'll get into that more as we move through the week. So again, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Rebecca Lee McCarthy. My degree is in comparative studies, sociology, philosophy, and rhetoric or communication. I have been a communication and ethics professor for many, many years, and I also occasionally teach theater. So democracy, this is a hot topic. Actually, it's been a hot topic since the ancient Greek times in Athens, 508 to 507 BC. The word democracy actually comes from ancient Greek roots. Demos means from the people, and kartos means strength or rule. And this was also a character. I want to say character. I don't know if that's really a good word to use, actually, but Kartos actually was also the war of God in early Greek times, and he kind of represented the authority of all things, but specifically the authority of war. Very important, keep that in your brain, and also of ruling, of legitimate authority. And we're going to talk about the different forms of authority later on this week. So the first democracy that existed was a representative democracy, kind of like what we are said to have today. And the only people who were able to participate in that democracy in early Athens were men who owned land and money. So if you were a woman, if you were a slave, if you were a peasant, you had no say in anything that was going on. So what is democracy? Well, on a basic level, democracy is rule by the people, ruling a community, ruling a nation, ruling your club through the general participation of everybody using the process of debate and consensus in order to make decisions. Now, the Museum of Australian Democracy has really a great article. I highly suggest you do a quick Google and take a look at it. But they offer us the four main principles of democracy. And the principles are the assumptions that often come along with the definition of a particular word. In this particular case, belief in the individual, that the individual is moral and rational. Belief in reason and progress. And this is based in the belief or the idea that growth and development is the natural condition of humankind. And it is the role of politics to help this come forth. And everything is about compromise. The third belief is the belief in society that is consensual, based on a desire for order and cooperation, not disorder and conflict. And again, compromise. And finally, the belief in shared power, based on the fact that we tend to suspect centralized power, whether it is centralized power by a particular individual, a group, a few individuals, or of course a government, and also corporations and businesses, and the list goes on and on. The problem is, and since democracy has existed, there's been a debate whether or not it is a way to govern that is a good way to govern, because there's a lot of problems with the principles. These are assumptions that are not always correct. For example, individuals are not always rational human beings. As I said on this program many times, we are emotional beings with the capacity to think. We are not rational beings with the capacity to feel. So the fact that we are putting so much emphasis on the rationality of human beings is often considered maybe a misnomer when people are debating whether or not democracy is a good idea. Now, the other thing is morality. People are moral. Sure, we are, most of us, I think. There's very few people who don't have some kind of morals to fall back on. But the big question is, are we talking about the same morality? So here in our country right now, we have a variety of moralities, a variety, and morals often come from our spiritual place, right? We have principles and we have moralities. That's the way I like to divide them. Principles sometimes can be devoid of spiritual or religious thought. Morality have often and traditionally been rooted in spiritual belief systems. So if we have a variety of moralities in a single country, what morality is correct? And if we are all coming from different points of view regarding our moral position, then how are we going to be able to compromise? Because morals are deep-seated values, which we often feel like cannot be compromised on. And as a result, when we are extremely moral and we all have different moralities, then what we end up doing is not wanting to come together and cooperate. So morality actually as an idea is problematic because we don't all share the same set of principles, if you will. And then next, what constitutes development in society? Is it economic development? Is it spiritual development? Is it development for our ecology, for our biology? What is good development? And that's a really difficult idea to be able to agree upon as well. In the United States, we often think that progress relates to business, not necessarily to the individual's growth, but to the business growth of a particular nation. And again, is that always a good thing? We have lots of debates about that. Climate change, for example, and how our business and corporations have developed and actually contributed to climate change. Also, how do we contribute to climate change as individuals, right? So again, what constitutes good development in a society is very, very difficult for all of us to agree on. And then consensus. Okay, we've already talked about this, but consensus is hard, man. And it's hard because of our deep-seated value system. When we have values that are so incorporated into our beings that they become almost invisible to us, that we don't actually see how our values are helping us to make certain decisions in life, then it's difficult to have a consensus with another person who might have a different set of values. Consensus work is hard work, and it requires us to remove our emotions. So we don't want to engage in the emotions. We're trying to engage in the ideas, and we need to be open to finding out that maybe our ideas are maybe not the best ideas. And that's not very easy for us. It's particularly not easy in an individualistic culture where each of us are told that we are important people, we are special people, our opinion counts, our values count. And if you really want to be successful, you got to hold on to those opinions. You got to hold on to those values in such a way that you don't lose definition of self. And this flies in the face of consensus. And the last problem, and I'm sure there's more, but the last one I'm going to look at is, can power really be shared? Can we really share power on a grand level? We have troubles sharing power in our household. My husband, who is an amazing guy, and I really appreciate him, but we find ourselves competing with the stupidest things. And this is a power play. All competition is a form of a power play. And so, like, we were working on the vacuum. So the vacuum wheels weren't working, and I took the vacuum apart and I was looking at it, and it looked like the belt had gotten loose. And I figured, oh, well, that's the problem, because I didn't see any major hair clumps or anything holding it. And so I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. So I decided we needed a new belt. But my husband came along and said, no, the belt is loose because the vacuum isn't inclined. And then he inclined it, demonstrating that the belt was just fine. But the thing was, is I wasn't necessarily in the space to listen and agree with his reason. And that's just over a vacuum. Now let's talk about economics. Let's talk about the environment. Let's talk about abortion. Let's talk about race rights, class rights, gender rights. And if having a problem sharing power over a vacuum and whether or not, it's broken or not is a ordeal, then these other things are huge ordeals. So it's very, very difficult for us to share power. And of course, in individualistic societies, again, it's even more difficult for us wanting to share power, because we tend to think our values, our morals, our opinions, our thoughts, our knowledge, all of that is the right knowledge. And if somebody doesn't agree with that, well, then they're just idiots or something else. So to have a democracy is super difficult. And philosophers since Plato has been arguing against democracy. And here we are in our country. We love our democracy, but the problems that have been pointed out since Athens, since 508 to 507 BC, these problems still exist with us today. So some of the main arguments against democracy is this: can average citizens make informed decisions? Deliberations and arguments on the important social, political, and economic issues that are being examined by a government. There's a lot of arguments that say, no, we can't. And Michael Lane Bruner, who is a really wonderful rhetorical scholar and somebody I respect highly, he explains how humans seem to lack, and it's been argued, he explains that it's been argued how humans seem to lack political wisdom, and that is a key argument against democracy. So he wrote, the history of what passes for stagecraft has been a history of governments undermining the power of critical citizens and of wars waged between parties. With its almost ceaseless violence and warfare, political history suggests humans simply lack political wisdom. The question is, can we trust our neighbors? Now, going back to the original definition of democracy and this god of war, we have to admit that throughout human history, we have often used war in its various guises in order to settle differences, rather than getting involved in democratic deliberation, in critical deliberation, in reasoning between parties. We find it a lot easier as a species to just kill somebody, to start a war, or to fire someone, or just to get rid of them, or whatever the means is. It's not new. It actually is part of our human nature. So can all citizens be informed and open to dissenting opinions without descending into violence and chaos? Are we willing to compromise? Or rather, are we more interested in holding on to our own point of view and what we think happens to be right? So this idea of an informed citizenship and our ability to rationally debate is at the core of why a lot of people feel that democracy is not a good political system. And there's good reason for this. For example, is information reliable and accessible to all? Think about that. That's actually kind of huge. Is information reliable and accessible to all? Now, this is why I started with the idea and the discussion about information access and reliability yesterday, because in our world, the answer would be no. The information that we mostly receive is not reliable. It's based on sometimes doxa, which, as a review from yesterday, is general opinion based upon educational experiences. And when I say educational experiences, I'm not talking about college or university or any of that stuff. What I'm talking about is life experiences that educate us to be able to reason out certain kind of situations. We do not have reliable information, and we certainly people do not have equal access to information. And these two things impede good democratic deliberations. Next, are all people born under the same economic situation, which allows them to have equal access not only to information in order to make informed decisions, but to the resources they need that would allow them to get information? And the answer to that one today is no. We have a variety of economic levels in this country and indeed throughout the world. And these economic levels impact the type of education we get, the education of our parents, whether we have to work 4 jobs and therefore we don't have the time to run out and vote or inform ourselves. Because if you're working that much, when you get home, you just want a beer and TV. That's all you want. Because I've been there. I've been there most of my life. So I understand that, sometimes we do not have the freedom to be able to inform ourselves because we're just too darn tired. So our economic station in life, wherever we happen to be at the moment, definitely impacts our ability to be informed citizens and have the leisure time to sit and debate the major issues. Next, do all people have access to the same educational model so that they can better make informed decisions using similar reasoning skills? And again, the answer to that one is no. The education system just here in the United States alone is so extraordinarily varied, that is, to the resources, to the money that the schools have, to the ability to teach to a student class size of, let's say, 10 versus a class size of 40, 50, or 250 people. So we do not have the same educational model. So we reason and we debate from very different levels of expertise. Next, are people rational with politics rather than emotional? I bet you can guess the answer to that one. It's going to be no. Again, we are emotional people with the ability to rationalize. But because our value systems are so deep, we tend to argue from an emotional point of view rather than a rational point of view. Next, this is the big one too. Are people born with the same set of tools? And all the way back to the early Greek philosopher Isocrates, he pointed out that we are not all born the same. Some people, for example, are born with the talent for debate, while other people just don't have that talent. So we are born very, very different, although we seem very similar. And our differences makes it kind of hard for us all to be on equal settings. Next, in 1922, I just want to point out Lippmann, who was a philosopher, and he talked a lot about democracy, and he wrote a book called Public Opinion. And he didn't feel that the ordinary citizen was really equipped to make critical judgment on important issues. So he wanted to have limited citizen input. Basically, he was promoting representative democracy, kind of like we have today, in which the experts could listen to the citizens, but because they were experts, they'd make decisions for them. Now, Plato also hated democracy. He reviewed several forms of government in his book, The Republic. And it's kind of interesting because I think how he saw what would happen to democracy is actually happening right now. For Plato, though, he wanted an aristocracy. So he believed that philosopher kings, that you would have a class of philosopher kings. And he said kings, but he did, interesting enough, say occasionally a woman could be born that would be part of this class. But he believed that if philosopher kings were born, and you could educate them and root them in wisdom and reason, then these would be the best people to make decisions for the society. And then, of course, he had a very caste system of society built. He felt that that would be the best way for us to rule society. On democracy, he said that it's a problem because people, when they are given too much freedom, they become slaves of their freedom, and they become controlled by things, for example, like riches and desires to promote their own good rather than the common good. They're going to want iPhones. They're going to want TV sets. They're going to want to go out dancing. They're going to want to have dinner every night. And because this massive freedom of democracy is going to kind of disintegrate into the individual desire rather than the desire to create an equitable society, that we were going to end up falling into tyranny. And tyranny then would be somebody would be able to come along, consolidate power, and then control over the people. And people who are so busy with their iPhones and their computers and their internets and their gaming and their arguing, that by the time they notice what happened, it's going to be too late. They're not going to be able to switch course. And that's what Plato ultimately felt about democracy. Now, today, we are often said to have a representative democracy. We do not have a participatory democracy where everybody gets to participate equally. We strike a balance. So there are many aspects in which we to directly decide how laws are created in our society through popular voting. But many other aspects are done through our representatives. And so we vote representatives who make decisions for us. But the question is, are we losing our representative democracy? And I would say that we actually are, because we're choosing representatives who aren't necessarily, at least not all of them, probably not most of them, representing our own interests in our own districts. And that's what it was supposed to be. That we would get together and we would elect the person who would best represent our particular interests at the highest levels of government. But the interests that are being represented now is not so much our interests, although it's often sold to us as our interests, but usually more about economic interests, corporate interests, business interests. And that's how things have changed. We are in a corporatocracy, corporationocracy. It's a kind of I think, a tongue twister word to say, where economic and a political system is controlled really by corporations and businesses. And this started to occur here in the United States when we said, or when the Supreme Court said in 1906, that corporations have the same rights as personhood. Now, they did put limits on it. So corporations can't, like, for example, directly now contribute to political campaigns, but they can contribute hundreds of thousands of dollars to PACs, right? And these PACs then are the ones that are sending the money to Washington. So it doesn't really matter if it's an indirect route in which that money makes it there. The money is definitely making it there from corporations. And the other way corporations have influences over our government is through the act of lobbying. But it used to be that lobbying was like, I'd be a representative of, I don't know, this is from the spirit store. So I'm going to Congress to represent the interests of the spirit store and my right, or the rights of the spirit store, to have Halloween year-round. And so I'm going to talk to senators, I'm going to talk to representatives, and I'm going to pitch and debate my point of view. And then they would think about it, and then they would vote on it. Maybe, maybe not, right? But now lobbyists are actually writing our legislation, and this has been happening for years. And there's so much legislation. There's so many rules. There's so many ways in which people need money, people need resources, laws need to be made, that a single representative or a single senator is not going to be able to do all of that research on their own, even with all the helpers in their offices. It's impossible. So slowly but surely, legislation has been written by lobbyists. And if the lobbyist can convince the representative or this of our government to agree with them, then that legislation is not written by our representatives. It's written by a lobbyist. It's written by an arm of a corporation. And as a result, the traditional representative democracy that exists, or that was hoped for, or that this country was designed for, is not actually functioning the way it needs to be functioning. So as we go into our meditation today, and it's going to be a short one, I'm sorry, I put too many notes up. As we go into our meditation, I want you to think about how often you are willing, absolutely willing, to truly listen to a different point of view than your own without becoming emotionally engaged, without defending your position, without saying I'm right and you are wrong. And this coincides with today's law of 7 Laws of Spirituality by Chopra, and Wednesday is the law of least effort. Accept people, situations, and events as they occur. Take responsibility for your situation and for all events seen as problems. Relinquish the need to defend your point of view. Since democracy is about deliberation and debate, as well as an openness to be willing to hear other people's ideas or points of views, this law, the law of least effort, is helpful to us because it reminds us that we are not the center of the universe. So take a few minutes to breathe. I want you to inhale deeply into your body for a count of 5. Hold for a count of 1 or 2. And then exhale for a count of 6 to 7. And as you breathe, simply observe your thoughts. Being mindful is not simply about being in the moment, although that's important. Remember, animals are always in the moment, but they aren't necessarily mindful. We can be in the moment when we get lost in our emotions, but we become mindful the moment we observe our emotions, we observe our thoughts, and we give ourselves the freedom to choose how we will react, how we will listen to another person's point of view, how we will participate in democratic processes. Simply deinvest in your absolutes for a moment. And consider the world of ideas, which is so vast, so varied, so overwhelming. It seems a little disingenuous to engage in a single point of view. Today, I invite you to live the law of least effort. Just step back from everything that you think is right and open yourself up to different points of view today. Don't argue. Don't debate, even though that's what should happen in democracies. But today, before taking that step, just be open to listening, absorbing, and developing a wider understanding of your world, how it functions, how people think of many different things. I thank you for being with me today. I hope that you have an amazing day, that you feel at peace, that you're able to observe, you find joy. Aloha and mahalo for your time. And of course, namaste.